When you see something like this, with its sleek design and high-end features, you might think to yourself, this guy wants to take my money. And sure, that's a natural reaction. But the truth is, the more you look at it, the more you realize that this is the kind of form that makes you feel like you're using something truly premium. And isn't that what we all want? Alright, let's dive into the code. First up, we have our card container, which holds a div with the card form class. We're using grid and flex classes to style once and reuse. Now, inside the card form, we've got 4 fields each with a label and input. Some of these inputs are numeric, so we've set the input mode to handle that. We've also got some pattern validation going on to make sure numbers follow a certain format. And let's not forget about the max length property, which limits the number of characters that can be entered. We've also got an add button, because who doesn't love adding things? Now it's time to make things beautiful. We've got our CSS reset, which basically says, all elements start at 0. We're not playing favorites here. And then there's the box sizing property. It takes the padding and border of an element and magically fits it within the width and height. Next up, we've got the root selector. It's setting the font size to 62.5%. What does that mean? Well, 1 rem is now 10 pixels. In addition to the root selector, we've got color 1 to 9, each with its own unique color value. We've also got color gradient 1 and 2. We've got the body selector. It sets the minimum height to 100 VH and 100 DVH, and setting the background color to a specific color variable. Additionally, it sets the display property to grid and centers the content both horizontally and vertically using the place items property. Do you remember the flex and grid classes? We define a property flex and a grid respectively. Next up, we've got the columns class. It sets the gap property to 1em, which creates a space between your columns. Now, starting with the card container, we've got a width of 30em and a minimum height of 30em. We've also set a gap of 1em between the elements within the container. We've given the background color of color 2. We've also set a border radius of 0.5em, which rounds off the corners of the container. We gave a padding of 2em and a position relative. This makes the elements inside a container relative to it. Moving on to the card form class, we've set flex direction to column and justify content to flex end. This aligns the form elements in a column and positions them at the bottom of the container. We set the font size to 1.4em, the gap to 0.3em, the flex duration to column and the margin bottom to 0.6em. The input fields themselves have a width of 100%, a padding of 0.3em, a font size of 1.2em, a border of 0. And a border radius of 0.3em. The color and background color are set using our custom color variables. The add button has been styled with a padding block of 0.5em. It has the same border radius, color and background color as the input. And we've also added a hover effect using a transition to make the button more interactive. Behold the majestic credit card. On the front we'll find a fancy Wi-Fi icon, a Visa logo, and a card number with more zeros than you can count. The cardholder's name and expiration date are also present because, let's face it, we all need to know when our credit cards expire. On the back we'll find CVV code. Back to painting. In the card class, we are using position absolute to place the card at top -7em and center using some calculation in the left property. The width is set to 23em and the height is set to 13em with a border radius of 0.5em. The background color is defined as color 3, which is a custom color variable we defined earlier. Next, we have the inner class with position absolute, inset of 0, padding 1em, border radius inherit. This class is used to style both front and back sides of the card. The front class uses a grid to create a layout with 3 rows. The back class is rotated using the rotate property and moved back using a negative z-index of 1. We also define a height variable. We have several more specific classes to style the various elements within the card, such as the top, middle, and bottom sections of the front of the card, as well as the magnetic stripe and CVV number on the back. Who can deny this card? With this fancy gradient animation. Let's do it! We're going to use the before and after pseudo-elements with the properties, content empty. We can put some value in here, but in this time we leave it empty, position absolute, inset 0, background a conic gradient with a color gradient variable 1, and border radius inherit. We put a little blur to give a glow effect using the property filter. We gonna rotate the background to make it more funny. To do that, we gonna use Houdini and app property. So the app property is a way that we can register a custom property like this. After that, we gonna use this custom property to animate the background. Now we set the z-index -1. To avoid this strange behavior, we set isolate on the card container. For the effect to appear on hover, we set the opacity to 0 on pseudo elements, and change the inset and opacity when hovering on the card container. Well, it's time to add some pepper using JavaScript. We have some code that selects a couple of elements. We have a card type, a couple of inputs, and as well as a CVV input. Now, the fun part begins. We have an event listener that listens for a click on the card type. When this event is triggered, we check whether the card element has the class master. If it does, we remove the master class, and if it doesn't, we add master class. And this is what happens when we click on the icon. We check again if the card element has the master class. If it does, we change the image source to MasterCard, and if not, we change to Visa. Are we missing something? Yes, to change background of pseudo elements to color gradient 2 when master class is added. Now we gonna fill the card, right? Let's do it. For each input element, we get the ID attribute and use it to select the corresponding label element. For the labels to actually change, we need to listen for when the key is pressed inside input, and change the label inner HTML with input value. Here is a point and not a comma. We also get references to the front and back elements of our card design. Now, let's look at some conditionals. If the input element has an ID of number, we add an event listener that listens for input events. When the input value changes, we strip out any non-numeric characters and format the string to have spaces between groups of 4 digits. If the input element has an ID of date, we add another event listener that listens for input events. When the input value changes, we strip out any non-numeric characters and format the string to have a slash between the month and year. Finally, if the input element has an ID of CVV input, we add some more event listeners. When the input value changes, we strip out any non-numeric characters and format the string to have 3 digits. This and other conditionals are used to format the result as the user types it in. We also add event listeners for when the input gains or loses focus. When the input gains focus, we rotate the card element to show the back of the card, and when it loses focus, we rotate it back to show the front. And that's it. This code is probably used to create a fancy credit card input form that looks and feels like the real deal. Hopefully it's secure too. I hope you found it helpful. Don't forget to leave a comment and smash the like button.